Because as we found in Afghanistan, the technology that the enemy had was very simple, but their ability to lay it in incredibly clever and tactically astute places was the real challenge. And you could only do a behaviour once or twice and then they'd target it, whatever that might be. So you really have to be aware all the time out there. And I'd say some of the bravest people in Afghanistan were the searchers, particularly from the combat arms, who'd had only a few weeks training really, and were that in front of our armoured vehicles, say, paving the way and searching their way through. And they took real pride, the ones I saw, in having that responsibility. But yeah, I think they were incredibly brave people, much braver than perhaps I was, because I'd had all that training behind me, and they didn't have that. In this week's episode, we return back to local government, don't we, mate? We do indeed.
Hello, Daniel McBirnie. It's good to see you again because we've known each other for a couple of years now, and actually I was really chuffed that when we bumped into each other at an event, you came over and asked me some advice before you went for local election. But before we get into all of that, and we do like to make sure that we shine a light on local government once in a while, because the majority of the 2.2 million veterans that live out there in the communities aren't all going to become MPs, and some, hopefully, more will decide to stand up and serve again in their local communities, and that's something that you have done. But like all our guests, we like to go back to the beginning of their career and what motivated you to join the army.
Yeah, sure. First, Johnny, can I say thanks very much for having me, and thanks for having this podcast and doing the work you do. There are people who are genuinely inspired by this, and it helps them kick off that journey. So personal thanks from me to you.
Cheers, mate. No, too kind.
Yeah, so go back to my military career. Like a couple of other people you've spoken to, I went to Welbeck College and then Shrivenham. I'm one of that gang, and then commissioned in 2003. I joined the logistics, and I joined the army. Do you remember that advert, Be Like Frank? That's kind of what I joined the army to do, to be like Frank.
So the guy was doing loads of adventurous training, on the windsurfer out in the sea, and
all of that.
Skiing.
All of that. Yeah. And I guess I got a bit of that out in Germany. My first few years of troop commander, a couple of op tours of Telek, 3 months Nordic skiing. Amazing, exactly what I joined the army for. I then specialised on the ATO course for a couple of years.
So for those that don't know, that's the Ammunition Technical Officers course, right? So in layman's terms, bomb disposal.
That's right. And it's a long-winded process, a couple of years' worth of courses to get to that point. And then you can then specialise in high-threat bomb disposal, which you can take overseas or deploy overseas to be an operator, ID operator, which I had the fortune of doing on Herrick 9, which was a particularly challenging operational tour, and then Telek 13, again as an operator, but that was a much calmer, wind down, dust the equipment, pack it back up kind of op tour.
Yeah, so I'm guessing you don't watch Trigger Point on ITV for fear of it triggering you, of all the inaccuracies.
Yeah, I know some people who work in SO15 in the bomb squad. They don't look or sound quite like the people on that show. A lot of them are previous ammunition technicians, soldiers, EOD operators from the army in their own right. Very charismatic bunch of individuals. But you're right, didn't watch that. Didn't watch Hurt Locker. Don't need to watch them.
It's funny though, because I know it's entertainment. When I was growing up, Soldier was the thing that was on the TV, right? And actually, if you look back then, the depictions of that were reasonably spot on. Even things, everyone looks at beret shaping. It's a topical thing. But the berets, the attention to detail, the culture, I think they did quite a good job, Soldier.
I concur. I also watched it as a kid, also was a factor in wanted to join the army.
Yeah, me too.
Big influencer, yeah.
Yeah, it was. So we do rib these kind of programmes, and I kind of say it in half jest, because they are actually ways in which people can be inspired to go and join either the police or the army. Yeah. They've got a part to play in telling the story, because storytelling for quite a long time before podcasts came along, it was very difficult. It was only really the stories that you heard down the pub or from family members. So did you have any of those storytellers outside of Soldier in the family or friends that inspired you to serve in the armed forces?
Yeah, like a lot of people, had grandparents who served in the military. I had one grandfather who was in the engineers, who was at Dunkirk and deployed to the Faroe Islands and helped build a runway there. My other granddad on the other side was a paratrooper that parachuted in on D-Day to Pegasus Bridge. So I've always had that influence in my life. And my uncle actually was a major in the Educational Training Corps, and it was while visiting him for New Year's Eve when I was a teenager that he said, "Have you heard of Welbeck College? It's a way into the military." And I thought, yeah, that sounds great, and that kind of sowed the seed for what became a 22-year career.
And that was quite difficult to get. I actually tried to get into Welbeck. I'm the least scientific, mathematical person, but a friend of mine have applied at cadets, and I was like, oh, that looks good. I want to get into the military, and that looked like a really. I remember the brochure. You know, it looked really sexy, really cool, and I was just so army-barmy as a 14-year-old or whatever it was. I had the interview and all the rest of it, but absolutely the wrong. If there was like a creative arts or politics history version of Welbeck, I'd have been all over it. So completely the right decision for them to reject me at that stage. But I mean, what was Welbeck like? And for those who don't know, it was the sixth form college, right, of the army specifically.
Yeah, I had an amazing time. You know, you have to do the maths and physics studying, but the other A level I studied was politics. And again, another thing that sowed the seed from then to where I've got to now. Yeah, I had an absolute blast. You know, this was 25 years ago in a boarding school, very male dominated. I look back and cringe at perhaps some of the behaviours and activities we got up to then. But yeah, absolute blast, and I made some real friends for life.
Yeah, and I get a sense that some of the Welbeckians I've spoken to, including on this podcast actually, they talk about that alumni that kind of carries them through their careers and post-service as well, a real tight bond. But you then went on armed with a decent education as well, because it was a really good education institution too. You eventually ended up going to the Royal Logistic Corps, but to actually then get selected for the Ammunition Technical Officers course, is that right? Got that
Close
right?
enough, yeah.
Bomb disposal. To get selected for that, and I actually did my work experience with the bomb disposal down in Folkestone when I was at school. Again, completely wrong fit for me. I'd have been horrible at that job. But what was that like, getting selected? Pretty tough?
They had a psychometric test you have to do, where they try and check that you've got the right mental aptitude, ways of thinking to go down that route. But interestingly, what they base it on is just other EOD operators or other ATOs from history. So it's, are you like other people that have gone before you? Yes, you are. And that's kind of one of the hurdles to get through. And
apart from the sort of technical side of it, is there a certain kind of demeanour or characteristic of an ATO?
I don't think so, no. No, definitely not. Definitely not. You know, male, female, big or small. As long as you've got the right mental aptitude to problem solve on your feet, understand problems, deal with people, which is a really useful skill, and you can walk up and down a road wearing a big bomb suit and loads of kit, they're probably the bits you need to be able to do.
Yeah. I think in terms of your trade, it was one of those trades that direct that kind of legacy and knowledge from the Northern Ireland years of dealing with IEDs undoubtedly saved so many people in the early days of Afghanistan and Iraq, as everyone was kind of tactically finding their feet, adjusting the way we operated, because we kind of went into those operations with literally Northern Ireland kit in terms of the snatch vehicle, Land Rover, and this kind of assumption that we could directly transfer a lot of the counterinsurgency skills and approaches, and we had to relearn a hell of a load of stuff, particularly around culture and language and that side of it. But I think the stuff that you guys brought to the battle space, ultimately saved a lot of our muckers' lives. So just thank you and your team and your community. Because you're not really a community that does get thanked publicly enough, and I think it's only right that we do, because and the victories are quiet victories, right? The stuff, a bit like the Secret Service, that you never hear about the successful operations that they foiled. You only hear about it when it goes wrong. But that must have been a fascinating operational environment to be in as well.
Yeah, it's everything you'd hoped you'd be able to do when you joined the army. Flying around in helicopters, there's explosions, people shooting, you're working with the teeth arms, but at the same time it's everything you hope would never happen. People getting killed, people getting killed, people getting seriously injured. it's the best of times and the worst of times, and a lot of people who were on tours of Afghanistan will relate to that, I imagine. I hope so anyway.
Yeah, I think so. And we were certainly, during my Afghan tour, it was all about, the counter IED threat. And actually what's really impressive was the knowledge transfer right down to the private soldiers. So we're not, qualified ATOs or anything. We call you guys in for that. But it was just the awareness, I think, and the search teams as well, which were absolutely epic. And sometimes people coming from low education backgrounds, poor socioeconomic backgrounds, that had this innate awareness around keeping us all safe, and it wasn't, yes, you have your specialisation, but I think there was a cultural shift in terms of that awareness, and as an 18-year-old on the ground in Northern Ireland too, that awareness of that kind of threat, which is really important. But now we've seen people will see in their communities those white I think they were Leyland Daffs, were they? The box wagons. Getting, they'll find a Second World War grenade in their gardens. So you're in our communities too. So I mean, how has that role transitioned back? Because I guess you were maintaining that role in the UK for that kind of scenario of Second World War grenade in the garden, as well as then turning out and going out the door out somewhere hot and sandy. I mean, how did your trade manage that, and also how are the guys now in terms of what they're focused on here in the UK? Yeah,
in two ways really. One, you're trained for threats in the UK, and then you're trained and tested and assessed for threats overseas in a high threat environment. But also it's the same fundamental philosophies and principles you'll follow whatever the threat may be. And it's that understanding those, getting the basics first, getting the groundwork in place, that allows you to then adapt. Because an improvised explosive device, there's a clue in the name, it's improvised. You can't just learn a textbook solution for every device that's out there. You have to be able to apply philosophies, principles, lessons learned from all previous incidents that you can understand and learn about, and apply them to that particular device in that scenario. Because as we found in Afghanistan, the technology that the enemy had was very simple, but their ability to lay it in incredibly clever and tactically astute places was the real challenge. And you could only do a behaviour once or twice and then they'd target it, whatever that might be. So you really have to be aware all the time out there. And I'd say some of the bravest people in Afghanistan were the searchers, particularly from the combat arms, who'd had only a few weeks training really, and were that in front of our armoured vehicles, say, paving the way and searching their way through. And they took real pride, the ones I saw, in having that responsibility. But yeah, I think they were incredibly brave people, much braver than perhaps I was, because I'd had all that training behind me, and they didn't have that. That's an interesting way of looking at it, because we could be talking about an 18-year-old private soldier from Sheffield, on his hands and knees in the dirt. Yeah, and they found the bomb. I only ever went when it had already been found. It's the searchers finding it really that I think had the much more challenging and potentially risky job at the time. Yeah, I always firmly believe that we should have paid them more. People operating the Valen, the metal detectors at the front of a patrol were often the youngest soldier on the ground, but by God, they were the most clued in, situationally aware. I believed at the time we should have paid them a little bit more to have done that job, but I guess that's history. It's interesting, that point about that transfer of skills from civil to military environments, because I think the other cohort that had that were the medics and surgeons. So they'll be dealing with knife crime in East London and trauma, and then that trauma skill that then take out to theatre on operations in places like Afghanistan, and then they'd learn loads there and then bring it back. And from my own experience of suffering a nasty injury in the UK, my surgeon had done 30 D-glove operations from IED strikes, and then was able then to use that and help me on a civilian context. Technology in war is a fascinating thing, from the burns victims of World War II right through to that IED stuff and medical stuff as well, which we all benefit from. But eventually, so you did pretty well in your career. You got to Lieutenant Colonel, is that right? Yeah. And out of that, you then transitioned into civilian life. Yeah. Pretty successfully. You enjoyed those first jobs? I loved it. I had an amazing time in the army. I thought I was probably going to be in the army for my whole career, but there comes to a point where you really need to balance your family life as well, and that point had come to me, the thought of weekly commuting didn't really wasn't going to work for us. So, and if you find yourself having worked at APC and managed people's careers, you can see when people are backing themselves into a corner, can only live in one part of the country or only do certain jobs. It's a challenge, and I didn't want to be in that position. And it coincided with me doing an executive MBA over a couple of years.
More education.
Yeah, and that working with civilian leaders from other, different parts of society made me realise actually maybe I'm going to be okay in the real world when I leave the military. So that gave me the confidence to make the leap.
So that's that leadership stuff that you were bringing from the military and then applying that within your MBA?
Absolutely, and seeing all other leadership styles that are out there, or management styles or ways of doing business. It really is, when it's time to leave the military and it's time, there's nothing to be scared of. But people do need to get a good run up to it. Anyone that's leaving the military, particularly if they want to go into financial services, I'll gladly reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll give them, half an hour, talk them through what I know, what my experiences are, and see where I can help. There's a big network out there to help people. I'm glad to be a part of that.
Oh, I know you do a lot of that as well. Definitely the advocacy, and you've worked here. So we're filming here today at Defence Relationship Management, my old workplace that looks after the Armed Forces Covenant and the Employee Recognition Scheme. So big shout out to DRM, and I will put in the show notes links to how you can access the Covenant or the ERS scheme as a business, big or small, because I know that you've done a lot of work on that and you advocate a lot. But essentially your role now is kind of like Chief of Staff, Operations Officer, getting stuff done. That's what you do within organisations, and that's what you're good at.
Yeah, I was very lucky to land a role at a company, this was 2.5 years ago, where they took a bit of a punt on me. I didn't know that much about financial services particularly, but I convinced them that I'd be able to keep up and just get stuff done. And that's such a skill that veterans can bring, because you change jobs every couple of years and you have to learn really quickly. So yeah, I was in a really, I still am in a really rewarding job. I've just recently changed companies. Really rewarding job that had a very fulfilling, challenging, great work environment. And I was really glad that just before I joined them, they'd signed the Armed Forces Covenant. And then I worked with the team at DRM here. We managed to get the silver and the gold Employer Recognition Scheme awards.
Amazing.
So it's brilliant. Really good time there. But I guess it's where it links to the politics side of things. Even though I was loving it, domestic life was great, professional life was great, there was still a itch that needed scratching. And I guess that's where I spent my whole adult life, in a role where I had a duty, I was serving, and I didn't have that anymore. And I considered joining the Army Reserve, but it wasn't really going to work for me. I was coaching in my local Sons football team, which was great, but there was still that itch needing scratching. And that kind of is one of the factors that ended up to me stepping up into local politics.
I was going to say, that inkling to serve never left you. And going into politics, you need a different kind of bomb suit, because you certainly, so you've come in... and you are part of an independent group, an independent party, right, rather than one of the traditional parties. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to get you on, actually, because people will often be put off by the party politics side of it. They'll see that as a little bit of a barrier. But in local government, actually, independent parties or independents in their own outright perform quite well and can actually get quite elected if you do have that community feel and get yourself well known in communities. Independents can do pretty well, albeit sometimes you miss the party machine that the big parties have. But how have you found that? I mean, why did you choose to become an independent?
Yeah, so the party I'm a member of is called the Residents for Uttlesford Party. Uttlesford is the district in North West Essex where we are. And it was set up in 2015, and we've now got elected politicians at all three levels of local government, the town level, the district level, and at county level.
That's pretty impressive.
And we've won our second term of running the district authority, and we've actually won awards for the stuff we've done. And I think what makes it unique is that we have elected councillors who were members of the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, and the Conservative Party, who all believe that putting residents first and supporting residents' needs without perhaps having to turn and face Westminster or any lines to take or any politics driven down from there, can come to better outcomes for residents. And it really resonates with residents when you say that on the doorstep and when you speak to them. And it's genuinely working, and it's a lovely organisation to be a part of, because we're all united by a common thread, which is doing the best things for residents, and that's it. And so it's a really enjoyable, and we've got a very broad spectrum of people from a range of backgrounds.
Talk about diversity of thought, right? They talk about that in business, but when you're talking having former Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, non-political people, then that's quite a challenge, as well as something you can make use of too.
It's really good, and it means we have healthy debates about issues. We don't have a whip at the district council, so people can vote where they see best. So if they want to vote for something that's going to affect the ward they live in, that's against what other people maybe in the party are voting for, then they can do that, because that's the best way to represent our residents. And it's genuinely working. And there are challenges working in local government, of course there are, but it's working. It's a really rewarding organisation to be a part of.
Yeah, and how's the family responded to the political Dan?
I'm really lucky that my wife is very forgiving and really accommodating and really supportive. I've got a busy job here in the city, and then 1 or 2 evenings a week there'll probably be some kind of committee type or event or meeting, in person or on Zoom, and then there's the sort of casework staying on top of that. But yeah, I'm 6-7 months into it, more than that, 8 months, and so far just about keeping the balance right. Yeah, it is a balance, and you have to keep a check on that. But the other thing you mentioned earlier on was the transferable skills into business, and you've even been recognised for that through the Gold Award by the MOD, because that basically is a reflection of the advocacy of those transferable skills in the people within organisations. And you spoke about it with your MBA as well, about learning about other leadership styles, but bring your bit of your leadership style from the military experience. What are those transferable skills that you've brought into politics? Being able to see things from other people's perspectives is really powerful. So anyone that's worked in a headquarters need to see things from the headquarters point of view and the unit's point of view. When you're dealing with different people on operations, local nationals, being able to see things from their point of view is really useful. And I'd also say you don't have to debate every point. You can just let someone tell you their problems. You haven't got to push back and argue against it. Okay. You haven't got to debate. Just allow it. And maybe it was working at APC when I was the Brigadier's career manager. That was a useful place to learn about listening to people's points of view at the time. So I think, being able to listen and see people's points of view, but you haven't got to debate the point. You can just allow them to have that point of view and leave it there. It is super, super useful. That is really interesting, and that's not something I've really thought about. I don't know if it's something I do naturally. You'll have to ask my wife. But that's really quite powerful, because you're not going to win over everyone. And actually, it was when I've interviewed some of the Northern Irish MPs, particularly those that negotiated the Good Friday Agreement, and I was chatting to Jim Shannon MP. Only this morning, which will come out alongside your episode, I'm really proud to say. And he was recounting a tale where he was talking to a Republican politician and basically started the conversation, look, will live my life for unionism against your cause. That's not going to change, right? You're against my cause. That's not going to change, right? How can we work together? Let's get that out of the way. It's going to be a waste of time debating over their core belief. And you haven't always got a debate over that core belief. Exactly. But what can you achieve together? Yep. And that's what I like about the armed forces community, because I do believe that shared experiences, both of recent times and on operations, shared values, you might start from different ideological backgrounds, you might have a different membership card in your pocket, but that gives us an opportunity to act as a bit of a human bridge. And that's what I like to hear about your residents' party, because there's probably a lot of that going on, where you're having to find some middle ground somewhere. Yeah, well, it happens actually in the district council where I am now. one of the Conservative councillors is a veteran. There is, as well as the Residents' Party, there is a couple of independents. One of them's a veteran as well. There's another couple of veterans in my party. So that common bond of being a veteran, that cuts through any other potential divisions that could be out there. Absolutely.
Oh, it's really quite powerful, and I think you're a brilliant example of it. So, enjoying what you're doing in local government now. Where's this all going to take you? Do you think? You're still a young guy, successful military career, business career going well, public service career going well. Where do you think you'll end up with all of this?
At the moment, I'm really happy doing what I'm doing. There'll be another election in 2027 for local government. I'm on the town council and the district council. My wife might say to me I should only perhaps be on one of those rather than both, but we'll look at see what I'm doing and see what the balance is, and ultimately to see what residents who they want to vote for at the time. But at the moment, I'm really happy doing what I'm doing. That the itch is being scratched well and truly, maybe a little bit red now. But really happy where I am and want to just keep doing more of the same.
And you had a career as a career manager as well at one stage up at APC Glasgow, advising people on how best to use their skills, what jobs to go for. So what would be your advice to our community that might be thinking about getting involved in local government in particular?
Yeah, as if you said before, you just need to pick a team. And even if you pick a team and then join, a lot of the big parties will do sessions on what it's like to be a councillor or what it might involve as a kind of gateway into there. I'd say just get to know the people in a party, what they're like. Do you fit in with them? You might not agree on every political policy they might have, but are you going to fit in? And there's other people you've spoken to on here that have just stood as complete independents. If you really feel strongly about it, then you can go for it. And fair play to people that do that. It must be, they must really put the hours in, because even from a residents' party, I get support with leafleting, with canvassing. It's not just all on one person. So those people that are pure independents, kudos to those guys.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. I know this will inspire a lot of people who might be sat on their hands at home going, oh, is it for me? Oh. Well, actually, yeah, it can be. Stand up and serve again. Give it a go. Be inspired and use those skills that you've learned through life, because you can make your community a better place.
Couldn't have said it better. You've got something to offer. Go use it.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.